So, good morning, everyone. At this webinar on meet criteria and successful projects, mainly from Holland. My name is Jaap De Koning. I delighted to see that there's a lot of people joining this webinar, almost more than 90 people. It's a bit of a strange way of giving a lecture other than doing a real seminar, because I don't see you. I hardly hear you, but we will try to make it a little bit active. And we is me and Andrea Chao.
Hi.
This webinar. First of all, what are we going to do? First of all, well, speakers, we'll introduce ourselves. I have some webinar rules in order to make it more solid, effective. Then I'll be giving a short introduction of this, where does it come from, etc. Then something, she's a lawyer, so she will talk about the legal perspective of meat. And after that, we will go into the guidance published by EFCA on meat 5-step model. During the presentation, I will give some examples, and in the end, there will be also a present example of a project that I'm involved in, show you how we develop meat criteria. As I said, I hope we will be having an active webinar, so I will show you that in the webinar rules. There are possibilities to make it active. First of all, who am I? I'm Jaap De Koning. I'm from Holland. Perhaps that's a bit strange to say, but I conclude we have a lot of participants, even from Turkey, Europe. So that's very pleasing, very comfortable. Okay. I'm from Holland. I work at Witteveen+Bos. That's an engineering company, 1,200 people working in Europe, in Holland, worldwide. But within Witteveen+Bos, I'm mainly active on procurement and contracting. That's my job. I'm chairing the Internal Market Committee at EFCA. And in Holland, I'm writing, I'm a lecturer at universities. I'm a member of the Committee of Procurement Experts. So I'm also, well, besides doing the actual work in the projects, also active on development. For instance, in the middle of the screen, you'll see the new Bouwteam model. Myself, but also Andrea, participated in writing it. It's a form of early contractor involvement. It's very popular in Holland. Sort of two-stage contract. You see that as part of the future. Anyway, that's not the subject for today. Today we're going to talk about meat. But anyway, this is talking to you, Jaap De Koning. What is EFCA? Those of you who don't know it. The European Federation of Engineering Consulting Associations, based in Brussels, representing 25 branch organizations, but also representing FIDIC Europe. A very big market, close to about 1 million of staff and more than 150 billion of annual turnover. So we are representing quite a large industry in Europe. And as I said, we have committees within EFCA, and I'm chairing the Internal Market Committee. And as you might realize, the Internal Market Committee is mainly about contracting and procurement in Europe. Okay, webinar rules. For those who have not yet participated too much in a webinar, what's happening now? My screen is going wrong. Anyway, please, for you who are participating, turn off the microphone and the camera, because then at least the website and Teams will be more secure. I can't read that. It's Russian. I don't know what it is.
It appears
someone has taken over the screen. How about Brussels, Virginie? I don't know.
I think somebody shared his screen and thus has thrown you off.
Oh.
So this person is Russian.
Yes, there seems to be
Obviously.
a Russian participant who took over my screen. So please correct it. It's not it's not meant to be.
Maybe trying to share your screen again.
The lady is called Natalia Titova.
Natalia Titova, please do not take over my screen. I will share my screen again.
Thank you.
Just a minute, please. Yes? Okay, webinar rules. Well, first, number one, take the right button. Please turn off your microphone and your camera, because we have so many participants that perhaps Teams will be vulnerable for that. So to make it more secure, please turn off your microphone and your camera. And use the chat function for questions, that's possible, or perhaps it's possible there's also a hand function in the top of your screen. You can click on the hand if you want to if you have a question or at least want to have some intention. Andrea will look at the screen and see if the hand is turned on or not. So please use that. We have 1.5 hours until 12 o'clock. We don't have a break in the program, so we'll just have the whole webinar in one piece. The sheets will be available afterwards, and not only the sheets, the content, we are being filmed at the moment, will also be on YouTube and LinkedIn. So we'll share what we're having today. Okay? I still hear some people not having their microphones turned off, so please turn them off. It's a little bit disturbing. I don't know who, but I hear there's a guest. No, it's no name. Please turn your microphone off, then it works perfect. Okay, these are the rules. Meet, most economically advantageous tender. What is it? Where does it come from? It comes actually, at least on a European scale, with the writing of the new directives in 2014. That started in about 2010. Then the discussion came on what should be the right award criteria in awarding a project if you are obliged to use the European directives. The discussion went on, and it took quite a long time to write the new directives, about 4 years. But in the end, the award criteria were changed, and meat was involved in the new directives. And that really was quite important, because the directives of 2014, they were really different than the ones we had in 2004. 10 years difference. The 2004 directives were mainly used for opening up markets, encouraging competition between countries and business. But the 2014s were connected to the 2020 goals of the European Commission. And they were quite clear. They wanted Europe to be smart, sustainable, have inclusive growth in 2020. And we're talking about 2014. So for that, we also needed innovation. We needed sustainable development. So there were clear goals. That's what Europe wanted in 2020. And the European directives should help in achieving these goals. So it also states another element that I always push forward. The directives and the rules we have on procurement are meant to be strategic. So use them in a strategic way. It's not only selecting a company. No, it's also thinking about what are my project goals, what are the policy goals of my company or my organization, and how can I use the directives in order to achieve these strategic goals. In these 4 years preparing the new directives, there were some issues. Intellectual services, but that's mainly connected to what EFCA is doing and what EFCA is representing. Engineering services, they are intellectual services, and our goal was to not let ourselves being procured by only price. So it also needs a sort of definition for intellectual services. Other elements were, for instance, more easy access to competitive procedure with negotiation. That's in the 2014 directives. A new procurement method, innovation partnership. Also in order to encourage innovation, encourage cooperation between organizations, public organizations and companies. And the introduction of life cycle costing, LCC, as a way of doing different things with price than only the price that you need for erecting the project. And of course, meat, most economically advantageous tender. Okay, a very important element. And the message was actually in this total set that the directives are very important. Procurement is the key to change. If you want to change the construction industry, the starting point is procurement. So realize that the way you organize your procurement, the way you use your meet criteria is a sort of foundation for your project. Then you specify the rules, you select the companies. So it is really the key to change, procurement. And within procurement, the role of meet. We also promised to say something about Holland. In Holland, we were just a little bit sooner than the directives in 2014. We had a new law, new Dutch procurement law in April of 2013. And in this law, we already said you should use meet as the award criteria. And you could change that, you could go to price, but then the principle was comply or explain. So that's the way that's actually the structure and the principles of the Dutch procurement law. But anyway, we were already starting with applying meet in 2013. So we had some more experience about that. And of course, after we had the new law, we also, after a couple of years, we said, well, what was the effect? There are two institutions who did some research. One of them was the Economic Institute for the Construction Industry in Holland, an investigation after the use of meat. And they concluded that meat was actually far more used than before, but it also became richer. Meat was not only planning combined with price, no, it was richer. More kinds of criteria, including criteria on sustainability. And the outcome of meat, what was the effect of applying meat in your procedure? Well, there were actually far more bidders with a low price and a high quality. And what would you like the most as a client, of course? This is the perfect outcome. You get a low price, you achieve high quality in your offers. So that's the combination you want. And that grew considerably. The other one was a very big client in Holland, the biggest client on infrastructure. That's the Department of Public Works and Waterways in the center of Holland. And they spend about 8 billion euros each year on infrastructure. So they are very, very big. And they also concluded that on procurement, if we look at the projects that are being procured on meat, 50% is rewarded on highest quality. That's what you want. And even 25% is highest quality and lowest price. So the perfect outcome. And it might seem strange because our perception is always that if you have high quality is expensive. And this shows that that is not the perfect rule. That's not the simple rule. It is possible that if you have a good bidder, a qualified professional bidder, he knows what to do, he has experience, he has a good view of the risks, etc. So he can make a good offer. He can offer you high quality on doing the job, but he also knows where the risks are, and he is able to translate that into a realistic price or even a low price, because he doesn't perceive risks that he has to put into his price because he knows the project, he knows what to do, given his experience and his track record. So the 25% is an important percentage because it shows that these kinds of companies, they have a chance of winning the project. Whereas as you only do it on price, well, There's no distinction on quality. It's only low price, lower, lower, lower. Anyway, these are important outcomes of assessments in Holland, and I wanted to share them with you. And then why should you use meat? Well, first of all, it's in the European directives. Andrea will say something about it, because that's perhaps a bit too short. It's in the European directives. It is in there, but there is some flexibility. Secondly, you get more value for money. As I showed you before, the assessment we had, it is possible to get a low price, but more value. Because in the meat criteria, you ask for extra value, and it is possible to get it more than just your own specifications or your own design as the basis for your project. One important element, especially for the industry, but also for clients, because the effect eventually comes back to the clients, is that it's no more the race to the bottom. With the race to the bottom, I mean only procuring on price. And if you're only procuring on price, of course you have price competition, but in the end you have to ask yourself, is this a sound method of procuring projects? Because it becomes lower and lower and lower. And every experienced project manager knows that if you have a very low price on in procurement, the project itself is often a hassle. You have constantly discussions about quality, about extra work, about changes, all costing a lot of money. And in the end, you probably won't end with a low price. You'll probably end possibly even with a higher price than your budget that you started with. So this is a way of getting a realistic price combined with quality and distinction of companies that are qualified and that are not qualified. So it's a perfect answer to against the race to the bottom. And last but not least, that's what I experience when we, as a company, for instance, try to get a job with a procurement using meat. We can show what we can. We can show we are an engineering company. We know a lot about technique in all sorts of ways, whether it's ground or construction. We can show them what we can. It's about our work. It's about what we're good at. And it is very rewarding to show that you're good at your work, and you can give them an offer that shows that you have quality, have a good track record, and you know what you're talking about. So that's perhaps a bit subjective advantage, but it's far more rewarding than only trying to make it as cheap as possible. It's not only about cheap; it's also about doing work that needs quality, and we can show that we have quality. So it's about our work. This is why we is my company, but also the EFCA is favorable of using meat. The question, of course, was in the beginning, if you don't know how to do it, how does meat criteria? What do they look like? How does it work? What is meat actually? Well, it is, of course, the most economically advantageous tender. And in 2019, eventually, EFCA wrote a guidance on how to derive meat criteria. I will go to that later. It's a 5-step model. But what is also good to know is that FIDIC, we're connected with, we're representing FIDIC in Europe, had a report in 2017 worldwide on the use of award criteria, because meat is an award criteria, that showed that 40% of the projects are still only on price. And that customers, clients, but also companies are more and more eager to use meat. So the appliance of meat is growing. And it's also good to show that the construction sector, the clients as well as the companies, are very much aware of the consequences by only using price. I told you a few minutes ago, experienced project managers know what it is to have a very low price as a result of your procurement process. It looks very promising, it looks well nice, a low price, but in the end the project will not be a nice project. So the question was, how can we derive criteria? And EFCA is trying to help our associations, our members in developing a guideline on using meat, and it was published last spring, spring 2019, a 5-step model in order to help you derive good criteria. Now, what is meat? Meat is, of course, simply the most economically advantageous tender. I said it already before, it's an award criteria. So in procurement, we have 2 types of criteria. We have selection criteria and award criteria. Selection criteria are being used to make the first selection of companies. So selection criteria only have to do with the company. It can be your experience, your size, etc. And after the pre-selection, if you use pre-selection in your procurement procedure, then in the second phase, a couple of companies are selected and they are asked to bring out an offer. And on the offer, we apply the award criteria. So meat is applicable in the second stage. It's an award criteria. Well, and to put it very simple, it's more than just price. So meat is price plus quality criteria. So it simply means we're not only looking at price, we're also looking at other elements in the offer, and together they point out the best offer, the best company. And of course, like more subjects, it becomes almost a science. It's statistically very interesting field of work. I won't go into this element in this seminar, but we are in favor, we as EFCA, of the Finnish method. It's a statistical instrument in order to make the assessment of meat more right than we do it at the moment. But anyway, it's not part of this seminar, but it's very interesting. But anyway, you can, if you have a room full of statistical people, they love meat and the way you assess and the way you use meat and try to get the best offer. What is the best offer? Because the difficulty about meat and assessing meat is that you have a price and you have quality. Price is objective and quality is a little bit of subjective. It can be a little bit of subjective. Andrea will say something about that. It's also a legal perspective, of course, about the assessment. But it's very important to realize that the assessment is not very simple. What is meat? I'm making it very concrete. This is one example of using meat. This is a real project, and in this table, you'll see we have 3 bidders, A, B, and C, and they had to offer a price, and they had to offer quality criteria on paper regarding quality of the work, project control, maintenance, and planning. So beside price, there were 4 quality criteria that had to be assessed by the client, and they could score high or low. If you look at under 1 price, you see the total price. That's the offer of the 3 companies. So company A offers 6.2 million, company B 5.7 almost, and C 5.1. So if we had this procurement procedure only on price, company C would get the job. That's clear probably. And now I see that. Can I? Okay, yeah. I don't see everything on my screen. I can't see the last row. Anyway, they also had to deliver offers on quality and project control, etc. And in the column on weight, you can see what this client has chosen on weight, price, and quality criteria. 50% price, 50% quality. Yeah, thank you. Okay, it's better, and I can see everything. And the 3 companies scored on these elements. Well, as you can see, for instance, company number A had quite a high score because you could score until 5. 5 was the maximum score, and he scored 4.68 on quality, while company number C only scored 1.59. So that's rather low. They did it on all these quality elements, project control, maintenance, and planning. And in the end, it all adds up. So the score on price, of course, the lowest price gets the highest points. As you can see, the best offer on price was company number C. They get 5 points, and the most expensive company was number A, and they got 3.9, so they didn't score very high. Combine these scores with the scores on quality, and you can conclude that company number B has the highest score. Not much difference with number A, but quite a difference with number C. So what happened here is that because company number B had made a very good offer on quality, they, in combination with the price, they compensated the higher price. So company number C was the cheapest, just in price. B was actually number 2, but because he had a very good assessment on quality, he eventually got the job. So that is possible in using meat, because quality is also a matter of assessment, also an element of assessment. You can combine a higher price, a little bit higher price, with a good quality. Because as you can see on these figures, company number C, they have a low price, but they don't score very high on quality. So that's why they didn't get the job. This is one example, and you can see here that statistically we used points. So that the one with the highest points gets the job. There's another method, and that is called monetarization. And this is another example. It's a bit more complex, but it's the same principle on price and quality. What you can see here is that if you look at below in the table, you see the lump sum. Excuse me, it's in Dutch. It says inschrijvingsbedrag, lump sum. That's the price they offer. This is about services. So we have 3 bidders, 695, 550, and the other one was that one. Get my help here. I can't see that either. Anyway, can't read it. Oh yes, I can read it now. Almost 400,000 euros. Okay, so what happens here is that they also score on quality elements, quite a lot. Actually, I think too much, but anyway, we have here 2, 4, 6, 8 quality criteria. And in total, they could score 100 points on these quality criteria. And these points are translated into money. And that's not real money, it's actually a sort of monopoly money, but it's to show what the value of their offer is in quality. So you translate it into, in this case, in euros. So in the end, their score on quality is being translated into euros, and it's subtracted from their real price. So what do we get? For instance, if we look at bidder number A said, my price is 659,000. Well, he gets quite a high score on added value, on quality, 607,500 euros. Fictitious euros, of course. We do that the same with B and C, and then in the end, the lowest one, so that's bidder number B, gets the job, 47,500. And you can see that he is not the cheapest, because the cheapest again is number C. Number C offers for 400,000, but his score is not very high. He only scores about 280,000 fictitious euros on quality. So in the end, it's not enough to compensate bidder number B, because bidder number B has a very good score quality. Not the highest on quality, that's number A, but combined with the price, eventually number B gets the job. That's the effect of this way of scoring. So the 2 examples I showed you are both on meat. The first one is a system with points. The second one is what we call monetarization. And the advantage of the second one is that it shows a little bit about how much you pay, sort of pay what you do as a client for rewarding quality. How much you value, that's right, yes. And of course, beforehand you choose how much do I value. We'll go to that later. What is the relation between price, the weight of price, and the weight of quality criteria? Okay, these were 2 examples. So number B is happy. because he wins the project. Okay, time for someone else.
This moment, maybe this is also a good moment to raise the questions. I haven't seen any questions yet in the chat, but do please feel free to raise the questions.
Yeah. Yes, okay, you got the message probably. If you have a question, put it in the chat or raise your hand. That's possible as well.
Yep.
Do we see that?
No.
We do? We don't? Well, that's the conclusion. I'm a very good teacher. Everybody understands what I'm talking about. If there are no questions, okay, we'll go to Andrea.
Yep.
Yep. I'll change that. Yeah. Stop at D. And I'll change the other one. Die gaat wel.
Ja.
Misschien bewerking schakelen. Dat moet.
Almost there.
Ja. Dus blijft hier. Dan. Oh. Dan is hij weer weg, hè?
Ja.
Excuse us, this is technique. Waar staat die? Nee, deze.
Ja.
Die. Het is niet de goede. Kijk, dan nog even. Share content. Waar is die nou? Dat is toch deze? Ja.
Yes.
It works. Yeah.
Okay. So these are the topics I'll discuss in, let's say, the next 30 minutes or so. What I'll do is, when discussing the different topics, apart from the introduction, obviously, I'll also ask Jaap to, well, provide some extra examples, etc., just to make it a bit more, well, practical and to give you the more the project management / the technical insight in this regard. So obviously, I'll introduce myself in a bit, and then I'll touch upon, well, let's say, these three legal topics. So first of all, the legal preference. Jaap already touched upon this a bit, and I'll elaborate on it. The role of price, impact, and a few considerations to take into account. And also, and that's Jaap also already mentioned it very briefly, the relevance of the procurement principles. Well, and obviously for the people here, well, in the room who well, are based in the EU country, who work on EU tenders, well, you'll know what procurement principles are all about. But even for the people within this webinar who are not that experienced with European tenders or simply do not deal with them because they do not work in an EU country, the principles that are mentioned here are actually quite, you could say, comparable to, for instance, the World Bank procurement principles. Have a slightly different name. Rather than having, well, 4 or 5 principles, you actually have 7 principles, but the concept behind it and how it's implemented, how it's explained is quite similar. And even apart from that, there are also some, let's say, non-legal but very practical reasons why you would actually want to adhere to this if you're a tendering authority. followed again by a Q&A. But if you have any questions during this session, do mention them in the chat. Jaap is keeping track of the chat. And like we said, we definitely invite you guys to have questions and to make this all a bit interactive. So, well, this is me. My name is Andrea Chao. I'm a lawyer at Simmons&Simmons in Amsterdam, Holland, focusing on procurement, project development, construction. A few of these photos, or in any case, one you'll recognize from Jaap's presentation. That is the one with the two hands, with a glove. I mean, it's Corona time. That is our early contractor involvement model we worked on. As Jaap's also doing, I published quite a bit in newspapers, but also in law reviews, nationally, internationally. And I worked on several of the projects that you see here. And from that perspective, well, those are also the experiences that I'm drawing from. So, meat, what is meat? Just taking a step back to what's mentioned in the directive, because that's what we lawyers like to do, take a step back, what's actually mentioned, and then bring it further. If you look at the current directive, meat can be explained in three different ways. It can mean a price-quality ratio, which is the interpretation that Jaap has been very much focused on. It can also mean lowest price, and it can mean lowest price based on cost effectiveness, whereby life cycle costing is an example. This is very much to distinguish from the concept of meat under the previous, the old directive, where meat actually had the meaning of price-quality ratio, SEC. So when discussing this topic, it's always good to know that if you look at literature, which is older than, let's say, 2014, meat will have a different meaning than when you look at it now. Now, from a legal perspective, meat means any form of award criterion. But obviously what we're doing here, and that's also the goal of EFCA, is focusing on the first point, the price-quality ratio. Typically, I don't per se like to copy-paste entire sections from legislation into my sheets, but this one, well, there were a few of them which actually were, I would almost say, well, beautiful. And this is one of them. And again, it ties in with what Jaap discussed. When looking at the 2014 directive compared to the 2004 directive beforehand, it was very clear that the EU legislator had a focus. They wanted to promote sustainability, quality, innovation. Also, you could almost say investment in EU companies to enable them to further develop their products and their offering. So from that perspective, if you're looking at the market in such a way, well, then only focusing on price creates that downward spiral that we just discussed. So from that perspective, in any case, at this moment, so 2014, the EU legislator decided, you know what, we need to give a push. We need to give a push towards quality. And how are we doing that? Well, for instance, by making it easier, making it more clear to use quality as part of the ratio. So the first one, the price-quality ratio. But secondly, we're even permitting, and this is mentioned in the considerations, we're even allowing member states to prohibit or restrict the usage of price. And you could say that that is exactly what has been done. And just checking what I cannot move this, so I can't see the entire sheet because I have a little box in front of it because I'm the speaker. Oh, perfect. Just putting this here. So the EU legislator allows member states in their own local legislation to actually prohibit or restrict the usage of price only. And that's actually something that the Dutch legislator has done. And that is that apply or explain mechanism that Jaap also mentioned. In Holland, in any case, the standard is that contracting authorities will use the price-quality ratio rather than lowest price. If you want to use lowest price, it's still possible, but you need to explain it. There's a very clear duty to provide your motivation on why you're using that. And the focus on having a solid explanation is increasing. I'm just, no. Yes, the following slide. So thinking about the role of price, I mean, it's not to say that price is negative. Obviously, you always need to take it into account. And I will also say why you always need to take it into account. But you always want to have a useful way of spending public money. There needs to be, it needs to be sensible. Accountable also. It also needs to be accountable. There aren't any open-ended budgets in Europe. And this is one of the reasons why price is still relevant. But depending on how you work with price, it can have an impact on the project. You can look at it as a way to achieve what is best for your project. And that's exactly what Jaap also mentioned. As I view it, a contract is just a first phase, or not, it's just one of the first phases in the entire lifetime of a project. It's let's say it's the agreement between parties, but it's not to say that once the project has been developed, in X amount of years later, that what parties actually end up paying and how parties have actually ended up working together is, matches what parties originally agreed upon. Meaning that, for instance, we can agree upon a contract of 100 euros, but if effectively we already know that that amount is too low, then actually we both already know that unless the contractor is willing to accept a loss, I'm going to end up paying more. So then that contract becomes just a written truth, a written world, rather than an actual world. And as a lawyer, I always feel it's very important that a contract reflects the actual world. So if you agree on a price needs to be sensible, because otherwise it doesn't hold any value. So one of the things we're looking at price is from the consideration of what is best for the project. Another aspect to look at price is from the perspective of proportionality. And I am referring to the EU tender principle of proportionality. To what extent is, adding a certain value to the concept of price, does that match the difficulty, the challenges of a project? If a project is very simple, if it's building something that has already been built loads of time before, then it can be very proportional, not to focus too much on quality, but to focus very much on price. It's off the shelf, everybody knows what they need to do, why make it more complex than you should? But in this current environment, and we're seeing it in Holland, perhaps a bit more than in other countries at the moment, but I strongly believe that in the end, all EU countries will end up somewhere in that path. We only have so much land available. We have an increasing amount of usage of land, or land has already been used. We have a lot of stakeholders. We have stakeholders becoming more and more involved in projects, not just simply accepting things, but actually voicing their views. Projects are becoming more complex. And if a project becomes more complex, then purely focusing on price actually means that you neglect that aspect of that complexity. And that is one of the things when considering award criterions, what matches the complexity of a project, thereby accepting that our building environment is becoming more complex, more crowded. And one aspect that is very important to consider when looking at price is if you are focusing on price, then bidders will also be incentivized to focus on price. Or rather said, bidders will be focused on offering you the lowest price they can offer to get the project in, which is not the same as ending up building a project for that amount. Because if you are very heavily focused on price and you know that your competitors will also be focused on price, you look at the project, you look at the contract, and you will start looking for gaps. Where are gaps where you can, obtain extra money, where you can obtain a change in the project, etc., and you'll count that in order to, superficially reduce your price. And then again, like I said, that paper world, that world that is not true as reflected in the contract, then, well, indeed is created in such a way. So that is one of the reasons that when looking at price, you need to be sensible and realistic. And otherwise, like mentioned also by Jaap, but also here, you get a race to the bottom, and you could also get a failed project. And what's a failed project? A failed project is a project that's not within budget, not within planning, that doesn't meet the technical requirements or the requirements in general, and which has disputes. And then you could say, well, it looks very nice that I enter into a contract with a very low price. Yes, but if you end up going to your board to get an extra budget, who wants that? And it creates a strain on the project. It makes this life more difficult of all involved parties. Well, on the other side, if you don't have any focus for price, because that's what I now also see happening in Holland in any case, where initially a lot of parties were like, I'm very scared to do anything else than price. Price is very clear cut, it's very objective. Actually, it can be just a paper truth. You also see parties now, well, let's almost say seeing the light and starting to focus on quality and even taking it a bit too far and only focus on quality. I have actually seen a few projects, which for that reason are not good examples, which have stated, well, we're not working with the budget, we're not working with a capped price, we're not working with a fixed price. Price does not have an element during tender or in the contract, in that regard. We're purely focusing on quality when it comes to the award criterions, and we're not providing any guideline as to price. Well, and that on that aspect, and also we'll go on that in a bit more detail, that is also not allowed. In the end, and I'm just flipping back a few slides, a price-quality ratio. Price is still an element. And like I said, I'll go into that in a bit more detail. Price needs to be an element, and it can be a fixed price, it can be a budget. To give an example, I always give is, I could ask bidders, what's the price of 1 pen? Or I could raise the question, I have 500 euros, how many pens can I get for that? Or what can the quality be of the pen that I get for that amount? Then the focus is on quality, while you still have an element of price. Well, and then looking at Dutch experiences, and Jaap already said, when I'm a bidder, when I'm advising a bidder, I actually feel more appreciated if I can focus on quality, because then I can show what I want to differentiate myself on. And that is also true in Holland. I mean, I'm just a lawyer. I do not have a statistical background, but my gut feeling tells me that parties are actually more inclined to go to court if there's a sole focus on price than if there is also a considerable focus on quality, simply because they feel appreciated. And obviously, I advise quite a few bidders when they go to court in case of tender litigation. And what I've noticed in that regard is 9 out of 10 times, and again, just a lawyer gut feeling, 9 out of 10 times when they go to court, it is because they feel mistreated. They feel they didn't have a fair chance. They feel that they were not appreciated. Because every bidder knows that if there's more than one bidder, at least one bidder will lose. So that is not the discussion. The discussion is, where did I lose? Because, well, for unfair reasons. And this is such an unfair reason that drives bidders to sometimes start litigation. Another thing to take into account is that quite a few tendering authorities actually have policies, tender policies in place. And what the interesting thing is that quite a few of these, and again, bad example, this is how it works in Holland. I hope it changed, bad example. Quite a lot of these tender authorities will have beautiful policies showing that they're focused on quality, on sustainability, on innovation, etc., which is good. But unfortunately, in the practice, you see that this is more, again, wishful thinking, etc., and doesn't work in practice. So the hope I have for the future is that where tendering authorities, or in any case, Dutch tendering authorities, have a tender policy in place, which is very ambitious, that they actually adhere to it. Because that is an aspect that does not yet have a very good legal framework in Holland, the legal value of a tender policy. But again, it's good to be ambitious. That is step one. So in the previous slide, I discussed that price always needs to have a role. The most important thing is that price needs to have the correct role, taking into account the interest and of the project, the complexity of the project, etc. And well, this is also very clearly explained by this consideration in the EU directive. And for the Dutch people here, this is also very clearly explained and repeated, you could say, in the legislative history with the Dutch Tender Act. There always needs to be some kind of price or cost element. And it can mean that you say, well, I have a budget of 500 euros. What can I get for it? It can also mean that you state, well, I don't exactly know yet what the total value will be of a project, but I'm willing to work on the basis of unit prices, etc., so that you compare unit prices rather than a fixed lump sum. But it is important to have price in it. Well, and looking at our Dutch experience, and I'll also ask Jaap in a bit to share his experiences. What is a recurring topic of discussion? Well, let's say me advising tendering authorities when they're my clients, in court also, and let's say in legal literature as a whole. To what extent does this ratio need to be elaborated on? How clear does it need to be? Because you could state, well, for price, I'll give you 50 points, and for quality, I'll give you 50 points. Yes, but then you still know nothing. Because what's meant with price? When do I get 50 points? When do I get 40 points? That needs to be elaborated on. And the same goes for quality. And because quality already has the risk in it that it becomes more subjective, quality especially, that criterion needs to be elaborated on in a very thoughtful manner. It needs to be considered in a very thoughtful manner. You need to make clear in your criterions what exactly you want to have from the bidder. And then I actually quite regularly have a discussion with tendering authorities who say, I don't want to work that out in a lot of detail because I, first of all, do not want to tell the bidders what I'm looking for. And secondly, they need to think about it themselves. I always tell them, well, if you tell them what you want, that will be the starting point. And anything extra, which they come up themselves, will differentiate them. But then in any case, you know that every bidder who has read the documentation correctly will in any case provide you with something that will in any case meet your expectations and your requirements. I like giving examples and examples that relate. So for instance, at home, at my home, and Jaap knows this analogy, we have discussions on how to put our used cutlery, etc., in our dishwasher. And my husband will tell me, you need to fill the dishwasher. Okay, well then I'll do it. And then he will tell me, but that's not how I wanted it done because it's way ineffective and you're just throwing it in there. But then you need to tell me how I need to do it. If you're not telling me how you expect it, then I'll do it the way how I see it fit. And it's just not my favorite chore. So you need to tell it. But maybe you can. Maybe you have a few examples of what you feel are actually very good levels of detail.
Levels of detail is always a discussion. When I'm a client consultant and the client asks me for advice about how should we fill in meat, how much should we give all the bidders, how much information should we give them, but also information, how are you going to assess the bids? There's always a discussion about how deep are we going? How much level of detail are we giving them? Also relating to how are we really going to do it? How can we do it? From the client side, of course. And you need to have discussion on this because I can also, I have sympathy for the strategy that the quality of the bidders can also be shown by the way they prove that they understand the question, they understand the project. So you get the answers from the experienced bidders in the correct way. While the inexperienced bidders, well, they are looking, they're giving the wrong answers, they're giving the wrong accents or way they fill in these price quality criteria. So the lower you get, the more detailed you get in showing how the assessment is going, or showing how you want them to fill in these quality criteria, the more you dictate the way, and the more they look alike. So it's always finding the balance between, it should be transparent, it should be the right type of competition, but it should also give them some freedom in filling in these quality criteria, showing that they know what they can do. It's not the subject of this webinar, but an approach like best value procurement is extreme in this, because they almost say, we are not, as clients are experienced, bidders are experienced. So there's a lot of freedom for the bidders to show them what they can, including not only a risk assessment, but also chances in the project, opportunities to show that they understand the project and they can even improve the outcome of the project by giving you some propositions about opportunities. So that's going even further. That's best value. But in any case, if you develop your meet criteria, it's good to have the discussion. And I'll show that in the 5-step approach. But then I can also already say that you have to test your meet set of criteria at the end. When you develop them, the last step is trying just fill in something, that bidders will perhaps provide you with, and see what happens. That's very important. What perhaps is also nice to say, that the Dutch experience on the level of the balance between price and quality criteria, I think already a couple of years ago, there was an interesting court case about bidders complaining that one of the projects of a client had more than 90% of price. So 90% of the weight of the total value was price, and 10% or even less was quality. And the bidder said, this is nonsense. If you just look at what we can score on quality, how important the weight of price is, then quality is a non-issue. Doesn't matter what we do on quality. This is window dressing. So this client says he's using meat, but the way he is balanced price and quality is totally useless. We don't have to do anything on quality. I can give you a very high quality or a low quality, but in the end, price will define the outcome. Well, the outcome of the court case was that the client was considered guilty. Can I say that like that? In breach of tender regulations, that's a legal way of saying that the client was doing it not right. So in effect, you could conclude that price was outweighed by 90%, so that it on paper it seemed to be meat, but in the end it was only price. So there is now some legislation already being formed on this subject, and I'll talk about it later. But the role and the combination between price and quality. So that's about price.
Yeah, just to add to that, because that's a very interesting topic. Like a few. So price quality ratio. If you say that you're applying price quality ratio, you need to do that. Jaap mentioned the court case. There have even been court cases where quality was reduced to a knockout and price was 100%. That's simply not how it works. So then the procurement principles. Again, like I said before, very EU legislation, EU case law driven, but also are relevant when, for instance, dealing with a World Bank tender, where they have similar concepts. Again, typically not a fan of copy pasting considerations or legislation, but this again was it was just a perfect sentence. This included everything I want to say apart from one thing, which I've added to the next slide. But it states that when looking at awarding contracts, you need to take into account these different principles: objectivity, transparency, non-discrimination, equal treatment, and you need to objectively compare the different bids in order to result in a meet. So when considering these principles, and if you ask me from a conceptual point of view, I feel that these principles are perhaps the most important element we have, in any case conceptually, in our tender legislation. And these are principles I personally feel are bigger than just legislation. This is what bidders feel is important. This is what parties, also if they're not EU parties, should adhere to when spending governmental money, when spending public money. When you're dealing with both the money of the public, of the taxpayers, and when effectively spending the time and money and energy of bidders, because you're also using that if you're setting up a tender, these are elements you need to take into account. And first of all, the objectivity. That means that if you apply a rule or you apply, well, a criterion, etc., you do so in an objective manner. So you do so in a way that is similar to party A as to party B. You explain rules, criterions in the same way towards all involved parties. And you do it in an objective way. Transparency, meaning that when setting up criterions, you do so in a way that parties actually understand what you mean. And that's a topic we discussed earlier, also with the dishwasher, etc. You need to be transparent. You need to tell me what you want. You need to, well, show what you want. And on the other side, once you start applying rules, applying criterions, you also need to do that in a transparent way in order to allow me as a bidder to verify whether you actually did that correctly. Because I as a bidder need to be able to hold you as a contract authority accountable for every decision that you're making. And I can only do that, and I can only verify it if I have the information to be able to do that. And again, I'll give a few concrete examples on the next slide. This is more the overarching concept. Well, then we have the principles of non-discrimination / equal treatment. Non-discrimination means that bidders are dealt with in the same manner, irrespective of their nationality. And equal treatment means, well, in a sense, the same, but not per se linked to that nationality. All bidders need to be treated equally. And then that principle of proportionality. And this is a principle that in Holland we've elaborated on in a set of guidelines when applying this principle. Which set of guidelines, by the way, and maybe we can add that link later on in the chat, has been translated in English for this and made available for free for the sole reason of, well, helping non-Dutch tendering authorities working with this concept. It means that every element, every choice made in regard of a tender, including even the contractual arrangements, which are not per se, strictly speaking, not part of the tender, but still, all need to be proportional when looking at, well, the scope and the size of the project. There needs to be a link. So to give an example, which you will feel very relatable, if I want to buy 500 euros worth of pens, I cannot demand 6 reference projects valued 1 million euros each. Ignoring the thresholds for in this example, there needs to be proportional. It needs to be reasonable when looking at the contract you're looking to award. And these principles also apply towards the price-quality ratio, like I already discussed a few times before. So to make it a bit more concrete, looking at, in any case, the Dutch approach, I've listed a few, 4 points of attention / lessons learned I'd like to discuss with you. A few minutes ago, I mentioned that in Holland, you could say in the past, quite some authorities were wary of actually using quality as element of an award criterion because they were afraid they were afraid that they would, well, that their decision would be challenged because it has that element of subjectivity. Certain governmental officials will be very, well, let's say, scared to do anything what can be challenged. And you could say, well, price is, well, it's very objective. Nobody can tell me as a governmental official that my decision is incorrect. So I'm only looking at price because then nobody can challenge what I've decided. But actually, obviously, that has a negative impact because you're focusing on price more than on quality. And we discussed the negative impact of that. On another side, where in situations where you also see parties being wary of using anything other than price is in situations, is in countries, and this is also a point I've seen on World Bank tenders where I've been involved. You're a bit afraid that your organization, the internal organization of the tender authority is not capable of, well, preventing favoritism or even corruption. I'm just putting it out there. I'm just being very brute just to mention it because this is a topic that is in the back of the mind of quite a few people also when looking at this approach, when looking at price quality ratio. And then the question is, how do you deal with that? How do you, on one hand, use price quality ratio because it has so many good impacts and so many relevant, well, it's useful. And on the other side, you prevent favoritism or corruption. Well, one topic we mentioned here, the level of detail in the criteria. If your criteria are sufficiently detailed, you will remove quite a lot of room to actually use favoritism, to actually to make that a problem. Because yes, although you're looking at something different than price, still it's very easy to score. Yes, and that for that offer you'll get 4 points, for that offer you'll get 5 points. It's still very clear cut. And in the same regard, that's the third point here. If you, well, I would almost say force yourself / your internal organization to make very detailed award letters, again, also tying in with the principle of transparency, well, it becomes more difficult to, well, act in a way that promotes favoritism if you are forced to actually put your decision on paper. You're making your decision public, you're making your decision open for verification by losing bidders. Well, in such a situation, still favoring one party over another party, although the one party actually didn't submit the best bid, that will be more difficult if you need to elaborate on your decision making in paper. So that is one of the reasons I always also suggest and advise my clients, if they're tender authorities, to have very detailed award letters. Yeah, it works with the transparency. And we discussed the aspect of appreciation. It also works for that. Bidders, if they compete in a project, they know that not every party can win. However, they are putting in a lot of time and effort and energy. Lost opportunity costs is a concept that then plays up. If you send them an award letter that is detailed, first of all, they can learn from it. And secondly, they know that you looked at their bid with a lot of care. They know that you've treated them fairly and they feel appreciated. So rather than being angry at you for not allowing them to win, that means that they can actually learn from the process. Oh, and I need to get so I'll speed it up a bit. They understand that they need to learn from the project and you're enabling them to do that. And don't underestimate this impact. The second point is the 2-envelope procedure. So what we mean with that is that before looking at the price, you first look at the quality, put on the number, the award for the quality, and only then look at price. Because then, well, the assessment team is not biased towards the cheaper offer. And very important, also a lesson learned in Holland is you need to have one assessment team that is assessing all different bids. You should not change the members in your assessment team per bid, because that will also result in a potential breach of your objectivity. Well, we discussed the aspect of litigation, and well, in any case in Holland, and that also applies in quite some other EU countries. Do note that if, as a tendering authority, you are in breach of tendering legislation, tendering rules, it could result in penalties. It could result in certain measures being made by authorities that override the tendering authority, or contracts could even be nullified. So it's not, if you apply such a ratio, you need to do it good. Okay, well, if there are any questions already, or Jaap, if you have anything you would like to add, maybe this is a good moment, or otherwise we'll go to the next session.
About the guidance.
Yeah, perfect.
If you have any questions, don't hesitate. Use the chat.
There was a hand.
Oh, there's a hand. Okay. Let's see where the hand is coming from.
Can we see? So, dear Nicola, we saw your hand, and we're now trying to look at how we can give you the floor.
Well, I will try with
Perfect.
unmute mic. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to draw attention on objective comparison. You mentioned a number of times objectivity, and in the last sentences you mentioned that we should keep our team on board and not to change. However, my idea is to have objective evaluation rather than subjective evaluation. So in terms, if you keep team the same, you will close to the idea that it will be objective. However, it will be subjective if you cannot change, or it is not advised to change team players. So in terms of all other aspects that you mentioned, transparency, equal treatment and so on, everything is fine for me, but I'm looking forward to see ideas how to evaluate criteria objectively. So I would like to hear from you. Do you have some experience about it, and do you have some suggestions else than put criteria as clearer and as much as it should target some value of the projects? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. So the first example, you already mentioned it yourself, to have one verification team for all the different bids. Another very practical solution I applied recently to a project is that in addition to the award criterions, there was a very elaborated, let's say, internal guideline for the team on when a certain answer would be awarded with a certain amount of points. So that was a topic that it was already. I'm seeing that somebody's, by the way, starting to share the presentation, but we'll come to that later. So that is also a very practical solution we saw up front before any bids were submitted, before the evaluation team had any idea on potential bids. There were already internal discussions on when a certain party should get a certain valuation. This is just to keep it a bit high level. I have examples where it went wrong, but these are examples that actually tie in with the topics we already mentioned. And obviously, what I would suggest is rather than having, let's say, each of the team members score their own and taking the sum out of the valuation that every person gave, is to actually also have and I'm just admitting someone to that, is to have after every party, every person within the evaluation team having actually looked at the bids and made their own considerations about the award, have a discussion in the group. In practice, that also works very well, because then actually when discussing, you go a level deeper. Okay, but what did we actually meant with X, Y, Z? okay, but if we give that person, that bidder, this score, then we should also give them that score. So it comes down to, you could say, communication. I don't know whether you have any.
Yes, well, it is a subject we might have an extra webinar on, because the assessment of bids is something you should really prepare and organize in the right way. As Andrea said, you should have a committee, more people than one, looking from different angles to the bidders. You should organize it in a way that what I mostly do is more first individual and then a consensus meeting. So we have a discussion with the whole group in order to give one type of assessment, one level of assessment to the bidders, but also to have the right arguments, because that is very important. When you assess the bids, you have to have the right arguments afterwards to explain why a bidder got a certain grade or a certain level of assessment. If you don't have the arguments, it's of course you have a lot of discussions, but you should always be able to explain afterwards why your score was not the highest, or perhaps it was the highest. These arguments are very much part of the qualitative group procedure. And together in the consensus meeting, you collect all these arguments. What is good, what is not good, compared also to the other bids. So you have the right arguments in order to have the arguments for the bid. We are in a hurry because we're already almost 12 o'clock. We have some questions. We had this question already, but I do want to say something about the 5-step approach. So I don't know if I have. I'll have to go back probably to the presentation. I think. Where am I? It's this one. Yes. And then this one. Yeah. Just in a couple of minutes, what is the guidance about? The guidance is about how do you derive meet criteria. So it's a guidance for clients or for client consultants in order to have a sort of methodology. How do you reach a good set of meet criteria? And it's a 5-step model. It says here 1 to 5 in the content. So you can use this methodology. You can also see something about examples. We have added quite a lot of examples, very different examples, from using meat in order to either procure a contractor or procure an engineer or something with services. So, and it's free for you, so you can just go to the EFCA site and download the guidance. It's no problem, and use it. Step 1, where do you start if you want to have a good set of meet criteria? Is looking at the project goals. Now, what are project goals? Project goals, of course, are not the project, not the product, not the scope, it's something else. It's almost always related to project or process management, like time, quality, sustainability, hindrance, etc. 2 types of goals. One goal has to do with the project itself. So you have to achieve something within the project. And the other one is more about the process of making and achieving eventually your outcome, your bridge or your building or whatever. So in the guidance, we explain what we mean by the 2 types of goals. Examples can be reduction of hindrance. If you have a project within the city, you can imagine that the execution of the project should give as minimal hindrance as possible. Well, that has nothing to do with the scope itself, of course, the building, but it does have to do with the way you execute the project. So reduction of hindrance. And you ask all the bidders, what are your ideas, what are your measures in order to achieve as little hindrance as possible? That can be eventually the outcome of the project goal. Energy neutral. There's a lot of organizations have policies on this, on sustainability, and it can be, we want this project not only to be executed, we also want it to be energy neutral in its performance. And that is an example of project goal that has to do with the scope. It can also be planning. We have a very strict milestone because we have money that's not being available after this milestone or whatever, that can be a project goal as well. So this is step number 1. Define your project goals. Step number 2, from these goals, these project goals, once you have them, derive the possible quality criteria. And in the meat guidance, we have said, well, actually there are 8 fields of criteria. So we give these 8 fields, and we also give 45 examples in total of quality criteria you can use on these 8 fields of criteria. And as you can see, it can be aesthetics, it can be sustainability, environment, risk management, functionality, of course, or availability. These are all examples of quality criteria you can use. Important on this step is they have to be contract or project related, of course. That has to do with selection, but it also has to do with the award criteria. You have to have some connection with the contract or the project, because a risk of a meat element is that it only stays as a promise. So it's because it's part of the bid. So the advice is always, if a bidder promises you something or has some element in meat, connect it to the contract. So you also have your quality assurance related to the things that the bidders have in their offer. So that's an important element in order to also keep the bidder to his promise that he has in the meat criteria. It has to do with the second element as well. The information must be verifiable, of course. As Andrea already stated, you have to give enough information for the bidders, so they don't have to search in the mist or think about it themselves or create it themselves. You have to give enough information about the project. And last, as you already have seen in the list, it doesn't include innovation, because we believe that innovation cannot be a project goal in itself. Innovation is just something new. That's all. Innovation has to contribute to a certain goal. So you could say, okay, I want to have it energy neutral. I reward measures being taken in order to make it energy neutral that are new. And in that way, I stimulate innovation. But just innovation only can never be a quality criteria. Okay, step number 3. If you have this list, these things you have thought of as a possible quality criteria, you have to choose a maximum of 4. And why 4? Because if you work it out and you assess it, including the weights, you will see that if you have more than 4 in statistically way, it's very difficult to have a difference between the bidders, because you just have too much elements in quality criteria. And on the other hand, you're also as a client, I think you should take care of not giving the bidders too high costs in tender. And the more quality criteria you have, the more work for bidders to provide you with the right offer. Step number 4, if you have these criteria, maximum of 4, then you have to attribute the weight to the criteria. And how can you do that? Well, actually, first thing you do is, what is my goal regarding price quality? That's step number 1. Is it 50-50 or is it 60-40? Or that's number 1. And once you have that, you look at the quality criteria. Okay, within the quality criteria, is there one criteria that's very important and it should have the highest weight, and so on. Just trying. It is a bit subjective, of course. You have to discuss with the client, what is important, what should you value in the end when assessing the bids on the criteria. And as we stated before, price, is our opinion, should never be higher than 50%. Otherwise, the weight of quality criteria is too low. It doesn't work in the total assessment. And then the last one, very important, perform a crash test, as we call it, test. There's someone with his microphone on. Would you please turn your microphone off, please? Otherwise, I hear too many persons. A crash test, that's the last one. You have your set, you have your weights, and just fill in something you could expect from the bidders. Just fill in some prices, fill in some scores on quality, see what happens. Because then you get the feeling that perhaps your set of criteria makes it still possible for bidders to give you a very low price and a lousy quality and still win the project. That's probably what you don't want. You want low prices, but you don't want someone with a very low price and a very lousy quality. So then you have to look at the weights, look at the way you assess the bids in order to exclude this kind of outcome if you don't want it. So that's what you do. You just challenge yourself actually, and if needed, change your parameters in order to make it work. Increase the weight of quality, or increase within the quality some elements in order to make it work in the right way. And then again, what I just showed you, if you use monetarization, you get a sort of feeling of the effect of putting quality in the assessment and making it a quality criteria. Because then you see what happens if you award quality in order to perhaps not having the cheapest bidder, but the second cheapest, for instance, then you really pay something extra, and that's extra is what you pay extra on quality. So you get a little bit of feeling of how much weight should I put into quality, what could be the outcome for me in order to pay something extra, not rewarding the lowest bid, but that's the price you pay for extra quality if you use monetarization. Actually, I think we're at 12 o'clock, aren't we? Almost. Do we have any questions?
Just I've been answering in the chat, translation of the guidelines on the proportionality principle, etc. So the majority of the questions is now dealt with.
Very good. Well, then just perhaps a very short example of a bridge, a current project in Holland. Actually, there are two bridges. One is relatively new. It has to be it needs maintenance, and the other one is old and it has to be replaced. It's a project we are now working on, and I'll skip right away to the criteria. Oh, I see that not everything is English anyway. But if you look at this criteria, the first one is the project ambitions. The client not only wanted this project just to be performed, give us a new bridge and put some maintenance on the other one. That's the pure technical scope of the project. But they added some extra ambitions. They also wanted to be a circular bridge, so on sustainability. They wanted to be energy neutral, so not using any electricity when being opened and closed. And they wanted to be as low in maintenance as possible. And these are elements that they don't come from the project itself. Now they come from the organization. The management team said, we want to be ambitious on sustainability, and this policy is now projected on this project, and in that way it becomes project goal and has its influence on the project. And they said, okay, then we'll put it into the meet criteria. The other one also is related to the project. They want to have efficient cooperation. They want to have an optimal cooperation between the bidder and the organization and the advisors. So they want to have a proposition from the bidders. How are we going to work together in the most efficient and pleasant way so that we have a good outcome of the project? So what measures are you proposing? That's number two. And the third one is not a policy. It's not coming from anywhere else or legislation. No, it's coming from experiences from this project in its municipality that they should take into account that the bridge is in a surrounding with people and traffic. And it's an important road. Two bridges are important. So we want to have an execution, a phasing in execution that causes as minimal hindrance as possible during execution. So, dear bidders, think about how are we going to execute this project? What steps are we going to take? Because of course you have to close one part of the road in order to maintain and also replace the other bridge. How are we going to do that? What are the effects on the road and the road users? And how can we make that as minimal as possible? So this is a very short example of this approach. This was the outcome of the approach, these 3 elements in criteria, and the explanation of where do they come from. And this could be the outcome on a project. And in this project, well, meat is a big part of the total assessment. Okay, we passed already, we had 12 o'clock. We would end at 12 o'clock. Andrea already sent you some answers and some links to useful guidance, for instance, on proportionality. And of course, the guide I showed you on Derive the Good Meat criteria is available on the EFCA site. And thank you for the suggestion of having another webinar, perhaps on assessment on quality criteria, because I think we can fill easily 1.5 hours on the subject and use examples and well, we'll do something about that. I can't see you all. We'd like to thank you for your time and your being present at the other side of the screen. Thank you very much. If you have extra questions, don't hesitate to ask. In the slides are our email addresses, or send them to EFCA and we'll get them and we'll try to answer them as best as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
And good luck.
Good luck on applying meat and possibly again next time. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.